Right. Thanks for coming back. Once again, we've been looking at the presidents, past and present, seeing how their actions have affected us and seeing what's going to happen in the future. Okay. Let's start off with the Biden years. We've looked at Clinton and Bush, and we've looked at Obama, and we looked at the first tour of Trump, but now we're going to focus in on Biden. And Biden, by the way, this is probably the longest portion of the program. We're probably not going to get all through it on part one here, but because he was so controversial in the things that happened, it's going to take longer. So when we get into part two, we'll finish it. The Biden years. The economy for Biden, needless to say, was not good. President Biden misled the American people about the pain his failed economic policies have inflicted. Under the Biden administration, our country is at the highest level of indebtedness in history, and inflation soared nearly 20%, and the American dream has grown increasingly out of reach. Strike the match, inflation in the United States. You see there, when Biden took office on January 21st, inflation started going up. The Democrats passed the largest spending bill in history, which caused our indebtedness, which in fact caused the problems that we're facing today. And we'll talk more about the kids graduating today going to find a job need about $40,000 more than the income they needed to buy a house whenever Trump was in administration the first time. But good news is on the horizon. You'll see what that is as we go along. Wages are down. Once again, this was dealing with 2002. This is the BBC reporting from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In 2020, the average earnings for all employees, now you have to understand this is for everybody, dropped significantly almost the minute that Biden took office. And it was down almost 10% within the first year. Buyers now need 70% more than they did 6 years ago to buy a home. Compared with spring 2019, the national household income required to buy a medium-priced home has jumped by nearly $47,000, largely driven by increasing home prices and elevated mortgage rates, according to therealtor.com. To purchase a house at the national median list price of $431,000, which in our neighborhood is about, that's about the going rate. A household needed to earn about $114,000 annually. Now, the annual income, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, typical household earned around $80,600 a year. So that was 41% less than the amount that actually was needed. But you do see on the graph on the right-hand side that the home prices and the amount that's needed is starting to go down under this president. Teachers' view on the state of public education. We've talked about education under Clinton, under Obama, under everybody else. And here now, this was in the middle of the Biden administration. You see the chart on the left shows that 82% of the teachers felt that education was worse in America. And the chart on the right showed they expected, or should I say they hoped, that it would get better. 82% thought it was bad or worse. On the right-hand side, they hoped that it would be better by 53%. And this was done by the Pew Research in 2023. Other issues during his administration, Biden administration, with infrastructure implementation. He got all of this money and said what he was going to do with it. Everybody was going to have connection to the internet. Klein pointed to the administration celebrated $42 billion rural broadband initiative from the 2021 infrastructure bill as a prime example of his efficiency. Despite this substantial funding allocation, only 3 out of 56 states and jurisdictions managed to complete the application process in 3 years. They didn't even get the program started. Biden's massive EV charging station, he promised $7.5 billion to build 500,000 EV charging stations. And during the time he was in office, he only got 7 of them built. Like you said, he talked a big show, but nothing really came of it. The Chinese balloon, the spy balloon that went over our country. Being in the military, retired military, this was very offensive to me because of the fact that this Chinese balloon went over our major missile bases in Montana and things. Not only did it do that, it went over a number of other military bases along the way. And Biden waited to give the order to shoot it down after it crossed our entire country and went on to the ocean. As you see, there's Senator Roger Wicker, Mississippi, ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We have consistently learned more from the press reports about the Chinese surveillance balloon than we have from this administration officials. I intend to hold this administration accountable. Student loans. President bragged about how his efforts were forgiving student loans. The truth is there's no such thing as canceling or forgiving the debt. It is just transferred. President Biden has forgiven $167 billion in student loans for 4.7 million students. But the White House isn't emphasizing that 87% of adults without student loans are being forced to pay for the 13% of the adults who did. Additionally, bailouts are incentivizing colleges to raise tuition prices. Studies have found the universities have raised tuition prices by 60 cents from every dollar of tax subsidies loans. He was not forgiving loans, but he placed the burden of the loans on the back of the working class. Let's see what else they funded. I have to go to the first one here. This is from the House Budget Committee. They spent $400,000 to determine whether lonely rats seek cocaine more than happy rats. You can't make this stuff up. $10 billion in maintaining, leasing, and furnishing empty federal office buildings. $20 million on teaching Pakistan, Vietnam, Colombia, and Brazil how to use fertilizer. And $2 million to New York University to study kids looking at Facebook ads about food. I'm sorry, I think that money could have been spent elsewhere. Tackling immigration. And I have to go right to this chart on the side. 7.2 million. Actually, the figure was more like 10 million. But if you look at that amount of people is more than the population, individual population of 36 of our states. The whole intent of this was to, in fact, get people in, feed them, house them, give them medical care, education, everything else. And then who are they going to vote for? They're going to change the election in many states, and they're going to vote for the people who funded them, and that's the Democrats. Let's look at Biden's legacy to the country. More than 43% of all food stamps are given to illegals. 95% of warrants for murder in Los Angeles are for illegals. Less than 2% of illegals are picking the crops that everybody keeps talking about, where 41% are on welfare. More than 66% of all births in California are to illegals on Medi-Cal, paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. 60% of all occupants of HUD properties on the U.S. are illegals. More than 39% of California students, grades 1 through 12, are illegals. 75% of LA's most wanted are illegals, and more than half of all gang members are illegals. That's a heck of a legacy to leave. The U.S. sees the record-breaking low recruiting numbers. 2024 will be a record low in U.S. military recruiting, said government officials. The new year will be the smallest active duty force since 1940. The Department of Defense says the military services missed recruiting goals by 41,000 during the 2023 fiscal year. The shortfall hits the Army, Navy, and Air Force. However, the Marine and Space Force did meet its recruiting goals. Officials want young people to enlist. The Department of Defense reports that only 23% of young people between the ages of 17 and 24 actually qualify to join the military. They're overweight, they're drug users, they have crime in their background, but even fewer have an interest in joining. We'll see how that changes in the future. Afghan became the biggest terrorist haven thanks to money and weapons Biden administration left behind. The Taliban regime made $3.4 billion in revenue since March 24 and March 25 and has allowed Al-Qaeda affiliates to arm themselves. This is really a sad situation because of the fact, having been in the military, I used to be in the cadre down at Eglin Air Force Base in a program called BRAT. It was Base Recovery After Attack. In Vietnam, we learned the lesson that you don't leave military buildings and equipment standing. You blow it up. They left aircraft, helicopters, all their weapons and everything else, billions of dollars worth of military equipment, and the Taliban has become an armed force. Okay, as you see down here in the middle of the second red part, the threat of terrorism from Afghanistan is far greater today than pre-9/11, as the Taliban controls all of Afghanistan, has the resources of the state, and has allowed Al-Qaeda to establish significant terror infrastructures, including training camps, safe houses, religious schools. Al-Qaeda has the time, space, and resources to recruit and train the next generation of terrorists and plot their next attack. The Biden administration left an estimated $7.12 billion worth of military-backed weapons when it withdrew from the American troops from the region. It's a sad state of affairs. The cost to taxpayers for Biden's illegals. Okay, let's just drop down to the second part there. Federal, state, and local governments spend about $720.9 billion annually, or $14,840 per student, on K-12 public education for illegals. Realizing that our entire military budget, including buying ships, planes, all the military, 270 plus military bases throughout the world, and all the people who work there, including civilians and military, only cost about $990 billion a year. So this is how much we're paying for illegals to live in this country while our debt's going up. Biden's failing everything, and this is according to the New York Post. The book you see on the right-hand side is from these people who are supposedly insiders to Biden's White House. Aides to Joe Biden have revealed that he was out of it during his final period in the White House and needed fluorescent tape fixed to the carpet to show him where to walk at events. Aides to Joe Biden have revealed he was out of it during his final period and needed and I was struck by how out of touch American politics he was. He was very, very focused on interactions with NATO. Clayne Whipple wrote, wondering half seriously if Biden thought he was the president of NATO instead of the United States. Joe Biden's $375 million green energy loan turned into a total disaster. His loan to Li-Cycle Holdings has turned into a disaster, with the company on the verge of bankruptcy just months after receiving taxpayer funds, raising concerns the viability of Biden's green energy. The Biden's administration green energy program has been criticized for mismanagement and lack of oversight, with reports of fraud and loans being made in financially unstable companies, leaving taxpayers at risk. The Department of Energy loan program finalized the loan for the cycle just 2 days before or after Biden lost the election to Donald Trump. It was part of Biden's desperate attempt to lock in over $20 billion in green energy loans during his administration's final weeks. Now let's see what that has done. If you've been paying any attention, and of course the American news doesn't talk about this because of the fact that it would make green energy questionable. Spain energy crisis. The entire peninsula with Portugal and Spain and some of France went dark starting on April 28th of this year. This just happened. Okay. They promised years ago to go green energy. The problem is green energy doesn't work all by itself. And here we've been complaining after a storm that people were out without energy for 2 weeks. How about the entire country being without energy? This is something that that we as Americans should really pay attention to, because this is a prime example that what can happen if you're putting all your eggs in one basket. We all knew Biden wasn't in charge, but wait until you hear who was. All right. This is Lindy Lee, who in fact was very, as a matter of fact, we'll just go right up to her right now because she has a little tape here, that video you're going to see. This woman, who was a part of the Democratic National Committee, who was actually a person who went out and supported with money and buildings and everything else to support the Democratic Party. She had some questions about Biden's capabilities, and let's listen to her for a minute.
So they threatened me. Dave, we didn't have a president.
Right.
We had a council of these unelected people that you've never even heard of, and they're Anita Dunn, Mike Donnellan, and Steve Ricchetti.
Meet the woman who just dropped a political nuke on the Democratic Party. Her name is Lindy Lee, and she wasn't just some campaign intern stuffing envelopes. She was a Kamala Harris surrogate, a Biden mega donor, and a Democratic National Committee leader with deep ties across the party. Before politics, she was an investment banker at Morgan Stanley, and she's been raising serious money for Democrats for years, not just for candidates, but also for cancer research and major causes. This woman sat on national boards. She hosted elite fundraisers. She was one of the party's top connectors to the Asian American community. I'm talking about someone who didn't just donate money, she literally donated buildings to the campaign. That's how invested she was. She was in the room. She saw everything. And now, she's done being loyal. She's telling the truth, and the truth is ugly. She didn't take this to CNN. She didn't take it to MSNBC. She took it to Dave Rubin, the guy the left tries to cancel every day because he gets to the truth. And in this interview, Lindy confirms what we've been saying for years. Biden was never in control. Kamala is an incoherent mess. Jill Biden was high on power, and the country was actually being run by a group of unelected political lifers no one voted for, and most Americans have never even heard of. This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy. This is straight from someone inside the machine. And oh yeah, she's writing a book. And she says they should be scared. They should be, because this is just the beginning.
Throughout 2023, I raised concerns, actually before, but I really started redoubling my efforts about Biden's cognitive decline, because it was so apparent to me that there's something wrong here. And so I saw the marked decline in Biden. What you said, though, Jill didn't kind of want him to stay. Jill desperately wanted him to stay. And please bear in mind that during this time, Biden had COVID, and Hunter was basically sitting in on White House meetings, high-level meetings that required security clearances. This guy is honestly, I'm not even entirely sure if he's a recovering drug addict.
They did find cocaine at the White House in an area that he was one of the few people that was in. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's undeniable that he peddled his influence to enrich himself and the big guy, quote unquote. So this is a guy sitting in the Oval Office, listening in on top-level White House meetings throughout this time, throughout the month of July. And I know because my friends are senior aides, and to like Steve Ricchetti and Nina Dunn. So Biden was incapacitated this entire time because he was really sick. Yeah,
Okay, we're going to stop that video because of the fact, once again, it just goes into depth. If you want to see it, please go on the internet, Linda Lee, and you can check it out yourself. Everybody wonders why Biden pardoned his family. And like I said, he pardoned his son, he pardoned his daughter, he pardoned his wife, he pardoned his brother, he pardoned his brother's wife, and everybody wondered why. Well, let's look at some of the reasons why. Whenever Hunter Biden worked for Burisma, okay, he actually contacted the people in Italy at the embassy and wanted them to help him deal with helping that company in Italy. He wanted them to front that company, which is illegal, okay? So he was peddling his connection to his father. This is whenever his father was vice president. Let's move on, though. The Biden family caught in a new scandal over massive undisclosed donations. Ashley Biden charity failed to disclose $500,000 in donations to the IRS, according to the complaint from the National Legal and Policy Center. At the center of the complaint is the Trauma Recovery Center Ashley launched in Philadelphia at the height of her father's presidency, the Women's Wellness Space. It got off the ground thanks to at least $500,000 in seed funding from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's Archewell Foundation and the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Al Capone was thrown in prison for a tax evasion of only $200,000. Is this donation what kept Prince Harry in the United States after he lied on his visa? These are all interesting questions. Now, here's the Biden family influence. After Biden became vice president, the family started over 20 companies. They were all limited liability companies formed after he became vice president. They received millions of dollars. Bank records show that Biden's family, their business associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign nationals and their related companies. Attempts to conceal large financial transactions after foreign companies sent money to businesses, associates, and companies. The Biden family received incremental payments over time to different bank accounts. These complicated financial transactions appeared to be meant to conceal the source of the funds and reduce the conspicuousness of the total amounts made to the Biden's account. Chinese nationals hid the source of the money. Chinese nationals and companies with significant ties to Chinese intelligence and the Chinese Communist Party hid the source of the funds paid out to Biden by layering domestic limited liability companies. The Biden family and associated activities in coordination with Chinese nationals and their corporate entities appeared in an attempt to engage in financial deception. You wondered why? Another Biden scandal revealed what they hid about the pandemic. Okay, during this whole time, Biden kept saying it didn't happen at Wuhan. But, according to the report that was sent out, suggested that 7 American military personnel may have contracted COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, in October 2019, months before the pandemic was officially declared. This revelation, which contradicts previous public statements by Biden administration, was hidden from the public eye, according to the Washington Free Beacon. The report, dated December 22, was legally mandated to be released to the public for over 2 years. It discloses that these 7 military service members exhibited symptoms akin to COVID-19 during or after their participation in the World Military Games in Wuhan. This contradicts the Biden administration 2021 claim that there was no evidence that any American participants contracted viruses during that game. Biden's appointees exposed. No experience, not born in America. Let me get this straight. A full third of the judges on the D.C. District Court, the most politically charged court in the country, by the way, weren't even born in the United States. And a bunch of them had zero nip nada experience as judges before they handed one of the most powerful gavels in the country. But now, 5 of the 15 active judges were born in Jamaica, India, Uruguay, Canada, and Trinidad and Tobago. Nothing against those countries, but this isn't the UN. It's a federal court with the power to affect national policy. Judge Reyes is one of these judges, has no experience on the bench before she was appointed, used the Broadway show Hamilton to justify why gays should be in the military. Gives you a scary idea about what these judges do. Biden stole billions after President Putin sent troops into Ukraine in 2022. The United States and its allies prohibited transactions blocking central bank and finance, blocking about $300 billion in sovereign Russian assets in the West. The United States proposed that working groups from the Group of 7 major industrialized nations explore ways to seize the money, according to the Financial Times. The problem is they stole the money. It was Russian money that we forced them through the accords that happened in the 1970s to get American dollars to buy oil. Or if they wanted to sell oil, they had to use American dollars from other countries to buy their oil. But they had American assets. So what did Biden do? With the stupidity of Congress, who approved this, he stole $300 billion in frozen assets. He stole them. They're not sure where they're at right now, which are really interesting. He was talking about giving some of them to Ukraine to pay for their rebuilding. The left's $7 trillion lie. Biden far outpaces Trump in racking up national debt. The Congressional Budget Office projection for 21, the last fiscal year of the Trump administration, forecasted the federal debt to reach $35.3 trillion by 2031. Today, 3.5 years into the Biden administration, the latest estimate from the CPO, the debt will hit over $42.5 trillion by 2031, which is an increase of almost, $7 trillion in debt. And you wonder why, people wonder why Trump is trying to get this under control. Because, once again, the Democrats, when they threw all this money, they voted to spend it like drunken sailors. It caused us a debt which is costing our future generations terrible problems. Okay, and we'll finish on this one for this portion of the program. Biden only signed 12 of his 162 executive orders. All those orders pardoning people, he never signed. A machine signed it. But who authorized them to sign it? That's the problem. According to the Missouri Attorney General, if true, these executive orders, pardons, and all the other actions are unconstitutional and legally void. Think what that can do to our country. We're going to stop on that note for this portion of the program. We'll have a second portion to finish off Biden and Trump's new administration, and I hope you come back to see that. All right? Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you very soon. Well, thanks for coming back. This is Talking Politics in Western Pennsylvania. I'm Bill Merrell. You may notice that, in fact, I'm wearing a little different outfit than I had in the first part of the program, and that's because the first part of the program was supposed to continue, but it went so long that we had to break it in two. But this is part two of that program, and I'm going to go over one of the slides that we left off. So if you look at this slide, the left $7 trillion lie. Biden far outpaces Trump in racking up the national debt. The congressional budget projection for 2021. Okay, the last year of the Trump administration, the forecast for federal debt was to be about $35.3 trillion by 2031. And here we are at 2025, and we already have a national debt of around $23 trillion. Because of the Biden administration and the Democrats voting to spend a lot of money over the last few years, the projected debt by 2031 is now $42.5 trillion. Once again, which is about $10 trillion more than it is right now. The sad part about this is the fact the interest on the national debt now is more than all the money we spent buying ships, planes, paying for salaries in the military, civilian, 270 plus bases throughout the world. We're spending more on interest than we are on all that. You're not getting a request for money from this, but you are paying for everything. So whenever you're looking at why you can't buy a house, this debt is a big part of the problem. Biden only signed 12 out of 162 executive orders. This is more interesting whenever you look at some of the news we've just heard lately about his physical condition, his physical health, and all of the documents that we saw in the first half of this program about his mental health while he's in office. So who actually signed those documents? That's the question. Were they able to just to get onto that signing machine and put documents under without his knowledge? The recent, well, we'll talk about it here in a second, her interview with Biden about the confidential and classified materials he had just was made public, the actual audio version of that. And you can go online and listen to it. And you can see why the investigator at the time, in fact, said that Biden was not capable of being prosecuted for taking all the classified material because he wasn't really there. And if you listen to that, I think you understand what he meant. If he didn't sign all those executive orders and the pardons, which we talked about earlier, mostly to his family, then who did? And did he know that that was actually happening? As you see at the bottom there, the Missouri AG, Bailey, said that if these executive pardons and things were in fact signed without his knowledge, they're unconstitutional and legally void. This could be a very constitutional issue here in the very near future. And as you see, it is coming to fruition. Justice is coming for Biden's auto-pen pardons. And Trump's Department of Justice just put everyone on notice. This just came out the other day on the 14th. They want to find out if Biden even had a clue on what he was doing, who is pardoning, why he was pardoning them, and everything else. Which, if he goes in front of a committee, which I think would be terrible for him, it will be something that, in fact, I think will be very discouraging to see how our country was and wasn't run over the last 4 years. Millions of non-citizens were given Social Security numbers under Biden. As you see there, you get a Social Security number, you get a Social Security, you get a Social Security number. Now, you remember one very interesting fact here is that Carter started the SSI program for people who didn't have any money to make sure that they, in fact, received a little bit every month so they could sustain life, okay? But that was taking away from the Social Security funds. There's no SSI tax that you pay to, in fact, get that program. They stole billions of dollars from the Social Security Fund to, in fact, pay for that program. Politicians like to feed people who, in fact, will vote for them. And they like to, in fact, do that in manners that, well, it seems really legitimate, just like letting all those illegals cross the border, hoping that they'll become citizens and get voting rights. Saying, who are you going to vote for if I've given you food, housing, medical, education? You're going to vote for the people who, in fact, funded all those things. Biden's job numbers explode. This is a very disturbing part that just came out last week. Allegations have surfaced that nearly 500,000 jobs purportedly created from last summer into fall last year never actually existed. This disclosure raises questions about the timing of these claims, which coincided with the presidential election, leading to suspicions of political maneuvering. The notion that Democrats might manipulate such critical data for electoral gain is a conscientious one, yet the implications are undeniable. The latest figures corroborate their concerns, revealing that instead of gaining 800,000 jobs during that period of time, the economy likely experienced a loss of 160,000 positions, which means almost 1 million positions were not there that the Democrats and this past administration were telling everybody. Now, despite the mainstream media's persistent endorsement of the administration's narrative, many Americans remain skeptical, sensing the economy's fragility. Joe Biden says dropped out of the 2024 race was hard because his presidency was so successful. This called a lot of people into question because he spent so much. We talked about some of his spending programs that, in fact, he had billions of dollars waiting to do many things. And out of the 56 states and regional areas that are under the United States, only 3 had the opportunity to complete the paperwork, let alone get anything going. Out of the 500,000 electric car stations that he was for powering them up, only 7 out of 500,000 was actually built. So there's a whole bunch. He's talking about how successful his administration is, but at whose price? This one just came out. David Hogue, who was in that terrible school shooting down in Florida, became the member of the Democratic National Committee. Matter of fact, he's one of the highest rated members, well, at least he was as of yesterday. Claims that the DNC, Democratic National Committee, spent $2 billion to hide Biden's decline. Then they removed him from power. As he admitted on Bill Maher's show, as you see on the bottom, he candidly admitted Democrats torched about $2 billion, trying to convince Americans not to believe their own eyes, and then President Biden's cognitive state and disastrous economy. If you tell people not to believe their eyes or their wallets, you're going to lose, Hogg confessed, seemingly oblivious to the firestorm he was igniting. And once again, they're taking a vote to remove him from the Democratic National Committee right now. Biden's presidency is a scandal of historic proportions, and this just came out on the 19th. One of the greatest scandals in American history, the legacy media, is now covering the mental incapacity of a president who apparently left the entire ship of state to unaccountable bureaucracy. And if you want to, then we talked about Robert Hur's interview with Biden. You'll see it down there on the bottom if you want to listen to it. It's informative, but on the other hand, it's very sad. It's very sad that we had a person who was not cognizant in his position running the country. And when we found out earlier from a person who was involved in the Democratic National Committee that three unelected people were basically doing that with Biden's son. So, like I said, this was a sad state. As we talked with all the other presidents, with shootings in schools, Biden's was disastrous. 21 through 25 years, you see there, topped out everybody. And it's really sad. The total there is about 1,400 shootings at schools while he was president, which was really quite sad in every possible way. Biden's legacy for the party. Now we're moving on to this Trump's first 100-day plus, the second term of Donald Trump. Army recruiting hits record highs after Trump's win. Remember under Biden, they had the lowest number of people in our military since before World War I. And we hardly had anybody. They were getting, they lost their recruiting status by over 40,000 people in 1 year, which means that they weren't even fulfilling the people who were retiring in the military. Now they're getting about 350 soldiers every day since December, which means that they will surpass, and I think I have it coming up here, yeah, if this rate continues, they will surpass Biden's recruitment by this month, mid-May. It was phenomenal. The kids just didn't want to come in under Biden, but now they seem to. Let's look at the Department of Education. This is quite interesting because when we talk about should we get rid of it, why, this might give you a couple reasons.
On March 20th, President Trump signed an executive order that drastically reduced the size of the Department of Education and began a process whereby he hoped it would finally bring about an end to the Department of Education. Now, this is controversial with some, but believe it or not, creating the Department of Education was not as popular as you might think. There were actually many opponents in 1979, not the least of which were prominent Democrats like Daniel Patrick Moynihan and even some teachers' unions like the American Federation of Teachers. It was seen as a massive federal intrusion into an issue that was better left to individuals, localities, and states. And over its 46-ish year history, the department has grown in size and budget, while test scores and other metrics that we use to monitor educational results have remained relatively flat. The department over time became a bludgeon that could be used against local school divisions by whoever happened to be holding power in the White House. And as it continued to wade into cultural war issues, such as threatening the removal of funds from local school districts that did not comply with controversial transgender policies, such as allowing boys into girls' locker rooms and sports teams, it appeared that the very worst predictions of what the department could become had actually arrived. But there is one area where many still seem to agree that the department is useful, perhaps even essential to ensuring that a quality educational environment is achieved in the United States, and that is on the question of educational studies. Because even those who agree that a bloated Department of Education should not exist often concede and sometimes even insist that there is one service provided that is still desperately needed, and that is in the area of studies. So, this sounds somewhat reasonable, but we need to assess the Department of Education's track record. There are generally two ways that the Department of Ed facilitates the conduct of studies. One is through the issuing of grants for academic research, and the other is through the Institute of Education Sciences, which is an in-house research wing of the department. So first, let's take a look at some of the studies that the Department of Education has funded. Here's one in which $1.3 million was issued as a grant from the IES to study the effects of a virtual reality penguin habitat on college students' climate change beliefs and environmental behaviors. What this did was it aimed to see if immersing students in a virtual reality penguin environment could shift their views on climate change.
Okay, we're going to stop with that because I think you see where that's going. It's basically an organization that has in fact become bloated with the idea that they have their own self-interest. Well, let's see what the education has done for us What has public education brought us? Some of you may have looked at this individual. He goes around to college campuses asking questions. So we're going to take a real quick glimpse at, well, what do the students actually know at college?
525?
Okay, I was just making sure.
Okay.
Right, 525?
Yeah.
Okay. What continent is Saudi Arabia in?
It's in Africa.
Africa, there you go. What country is Dubai in?
India.
India, there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
I was like, no, I thought you said country, or I thought you said continent at first. I'm like, what the f? That's a city, dude.
You're wrong. It's the UAE.
Dubai? Is it not?
No.
I thought Dubai was in India. I'm just a little racist. It's fine. No.
Yeah, it's all good. Hey.
Hey, whoa, whoa, whoa.
What country is Dubai in?
Europe.
Europe, there you go. Yeah.
Right?
What continent is Saudi Arabia in?
Europe.
There you go.
Europe.
What continent is Saudi Arabia in?
Europe.
Europe, okay. What continent is Saudi Arabia in?
Asia.
Asia, there you go, there you go. That's correct, that's correct. It's not Europe. What country is Dubai in?
I don't know this. What country?
Country, yep.
I thought it was its own country.
Really?
No.
You know what? What is it?
Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi.
Am I right? Oh no, you're wrong. That's not a country.
What is the plural term for sheep?
Sheeps.
Sheeps.
Wait, why y'all laughing?
What is 3 cubed?
9.
3 times 3 times 3.
9.
9, okay, there you go. What is 9 plus 9 plus 9?
I'm not sure. 99?
99, there you go. No, it's 27. What is 3 times 3?
6.
6, okay.
Okay, I think we've seen enough of that. Education in the United States seems to be having some major problems. Talking about education, ex-California Teacher of the Year gets 30 years behind bars for heinous crimes. Okay, this is what we're facing today, and we have to be very concerned about the quality of people we're bringing into education as well as their teaching abilities. Biden obviously leaving Trump and economy on the precipice of disaster. Okay, we've talked about this already. These dropped down to the third paragraph. In October and November 2023, the federal deficit was $380 billion. For the same months this year, it's already $624 billion. A shocking 64% increase over last year with no plan in place to constrain it. Let's hear about tariffs and what they actually mean. Most people don't know what this tariff thing is. Let's learn from it.
Hello, this is Victor Davis Hansen for the Daily Signal. April 3rd, Donald Trump announced it as Liberation Day, and by that he meant we were going to be liberated from asymmetrical tariffs of the last 50 years. And it was going to inaugurate a new, what he called, golden age of trade parity, greater investment in the United States, but mostly greater job opportunities and higher paying jobs for Americans. And yet the world seemed to erupt in anger. It was very strange. Even people on the libertarian right and of course the left were very angry. Wall Street Journal pilloried Donald Trump. But here's my question. China has prohibitive tariffs. So does Vietnam. So does Mexico. So does Europe. So do a lot of countries. So does India. But if tariffs are so destructive of their economies, why is China booming? How did India become an economic powerhouse when it has these exorbitant tariffs on American imports? How did Vietnam, of all places, become such a different country, even though it has these prohibitive tariffs? Why isn't Germany, before its energy problems, why wasn't it a wreck? It's got tariffs on almost everything that we send them. How is the EU even functioning with these tariffs? I thought tariffs destroyed an economy, but they seem to like them. And they're angry that they're no longer asymmetrical. Apparently, our people who are tariffing us think tariffs improve their economy. Maybe they're right, I don't know. The second thing is, why would you get angry at the person who is reacting to the asymmetrical tariff and not the people who inaugurated the tariff? Why is Canada mad at us when it's running a $63 billion surplus and it has tariffs on some American products at 250%? Doesn't it seem like the people who started this asymmetrical, if I could use the word trade war, should be the culpable people, not the people who are reluctantly reacting to it? Sort of like Ukraine and Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. Do we blame Ukraine for defending itself and trying to reciprocate? No, we don't. We don't blame America because it finally woke up and said, whatever they tariff us, we're going to tariff them. Which brings up another question. Are our tariffs really tariffs? That is, were they preemptive? Were they leveled against countries that had no tariffs against us? Were they punitive? No. They're almost leveled on autopilot. Whatever a particular country tariffs us, we reciprocate and just mirror image them. And they go off anytime that country says, you know, it was a mistake. We're sorry. You're an ally. You're a neutral. We're not going to tariff this American product. And we say, fine. Then the autopilot ceases and the automatic tariff ends. In other words, it's their choice, not ours. We're just reacting to what they did, not what we did. A couple of other questions that I've had. We haven't run a trade surplus since 1975, 50 years. So it wasn't suddenly we woke up and said, it's unfair, we want commercial justice. No, we've been watching this happen for 50 years. It's been going on. And no president, or no administration, no Congress in the past has done anything about it. Done anything about what? Leveling tariffs on our products that we don't level on theirs. It was all predicated in the post-war period. We were so affluent, so powerful. Europe, China, Russia was in shambles, that we had to take up the burdens of reviving the economy by taking great trade deficits. 50 years later, we have been deindustrialized. And the countries who did this to us by these unfair and asymmetrical tariffs did not fall apart. They did not self-destruct. They apparently thought it was in their self-interest. And if anybody calibrates the recent GDP growth of India or Taiwan or South Korea or Japan, they seem to have some logic to it. There's a final irony. The people who are warning us most vehemently about this tariff quote the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. But remember something. That came after the onset of the Depression, after the stock market crashed in 1929. That law was not passed till 1930. It was not really implemented to 31. And here's the other thing that they were conveniently not reminded of. We were running a surplus. That was a preemptive punitive tariff on our part against other countries. We had a trade surplus, and it was not 10 or 20%. Some of the tariffs were 40 and 50%. And again, it happened after the collapse of the stock market. In conclusion, don't you find it very ironic that Wall Street is blaming the Trump tariffs for heading us into a recession, if not depression, when the only Great Depression we've ever had was not caused by tariffs, but by Wall Street? This is Victor Davis Hanson for the Daily Signal.
Linda, so we're going to take a break there, and in fact, come back after our break. Stick with us, and in fact, we'll be looking to see on the other side. I hope so far you've understood that the things that we've been hearing about tariffs, how terrible and everything else, you're only hearing one side. You know, of course, now if you listen to the news, especially on ABC News, you know, if it's snowing outside, it's because of tariffs. If a kid gets his leg broken, it's because of tariffs. They taint the news so badly anymore just to, in fact, try to make a point. So anyhow, see you on the other side. Thanks for coming back. This is Bill Merrell, and this is Talking Politics in Western Pennsylvania. We're going to move real fast because we're going to get the rest of this done in this period, so we're going to start right now. This is probably one of the first times that I've ever absolutely agreed with Nancy Pelosi.
How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit and loss of jobs for the American worker? And how much more dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, I will not endorse the status quo? As I mentioned, it's about jobs, proliferation, and human rights. And there are those who say we shouldn't link human rights and trade and proliferation and trade. I disagree. But if we just want to take up this issue on the basis of economics alone, indeed, China should not receive most favored nation status for several reasons that I'd like to go into now. I'd like to call the attention of our colleagues to this chart on the status quo that the business community is asking each and every one of us to endorse today. Right now, we have a $34 billion trade deficit with China, the 1995 figure. It will be over $40 billion for 1996. Since the Tiananmen Square massacre, this figure has increased 1,000%, from $3.5 billion then to about $34 billion now. In terms of tariffs, I think it's interesting to note that the average U.S. MFN tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States is 2%, whereas the average Chinese MFN tariff on U.S. goods going into China is 35%. Is that reciprocal? On exports, China only allows certain industries into China, of U.S. Industries into China, and therefore only 2% of U.S. exports are allowed into China. On the other hand, the U.S. allows China to flood our markets with a third of their exports, and that'll probably go over 40%, and it's limitless because we have not placed any restriction. In terms of jobs, this is the biggest and cruelest hoax of all. Not only do we not have market access, not only do they have prohibitive tariffs, not only are our exports not let in very specifically, but China benefits with at least 10 million jobs from U.S.-China trade. The president in his statement requesting this special waiver said that China trade supports 170,000 jobs in the United States, 170,000 jobs, whereas our imports from China support 10 million jobs at least. Fact is that U.S.-China trade is a job loser. And one of the reasons that it is because well, first let me just make another point, and that is that our colleagues on the other side of this issue will say that trade with China, exports to China have increased 3 times in the last 10 years. They have. But they fail to mention that imports from China have increased 11 times, thereby leading to this huge trade deficit.
Okay, we're going to stop that there. Isn't it funny that in the 90s, the Democrats were pushing for a tariff relief, but now it's the other way around, and they're fighting it. So, I mean, like I said, politics makes a strange bedfellow, and sometimes it's really bad. But here's what the American media has not told you, okay? The news MSN won't tell you that we are winning the tariff war with China. We are winning, and winning big. Riots and protests have erupted all over China. Trump's tariffs are absolutely eviscerating the China economy. China depends on and needs the economy of the United States. They are now calling for President Xi to step down. Now, folks, I dare anybody to show me something that MSN or ABC or CBS has told us about riots in China to, in fact, call for the president of China to step down. We have not seen this because this feeds into support of Trump's tariffs. This tells us exactly what Pelosi said. We are an economy that buys things. They are an economy that builds things. If we're not buying, they're not building. These people have been thrown out. They're not paid. They've been owed back money, and they're actually having riots because of it. Somebody's got to wake up pretty soon and realize that This is a battle that we've been fighting for many, many years. Inflation showed more than expected in April, according to CNN, despite tariffs-related pressures. Okay, this is exactly opposite of what the media was telling us for all this time, that prices are going up. Everything's going up because of tariffs. Even Walmart came out the other day and made that comment. Well, you know what? Egg prices are going down, gas prices are going down. We'll see that. Inflation is dropping, but these prices are still soaring. According to the ABC News, inflation cooled in the aftermath of President Donald's Liberation Day, dropping to a 4-year low and defying fears of tariff-driven price hikes. There are things that are, in fact, going up. Coffee, beef. Once again, the food in the country, you have to realize right now, you're hearing every day about terrible conditions in the breadbasket of America. It's being flooded, tornadoes tearing it apart. This is the growing season. If, in fact, we don't have a period for growing, then food prices are going to go up. Has nothing to do with tariffs. Okay, that aspect has nothing. Coffee. Recent droughts in Vietnam and Brazil, two of the world's largest coffee producers, have restricted global output. It has nothing to do with tariffs. Beef prices. Do you know, I heard the story the other day that 28% or 28 major beef producing plants were burned down over the last 3 years. Seems interesting. Okay. In 2022, a major drought in the beef-producing regions of the U.S. forced cattle herders to sell off more animals than usual. Since the drought raised costs for cattle feed, which in turn made it more expensive for ranchers to maintain their herds. Some things are beyond tariffs, okay, and we have to get back to common sense when we start listening to the news. U.S. and China agreed to drastically roll back tariffs. Now, this is temporarily, only for 90 days, but as we've shown you, they're in worse shape with tariffs than we are. So if they keep high tariffs, then if they keep their high tariffs and we are reciprocal on those tariffs, then in fact they're going to damage their economy much more than we are. We're going to feel it, okay? There's no doubt about it. But Trump opened South Korea trade talks as 70 nations of the U.S. Talk about tariffs. The European Commission, 27 nations of the European Commission want to sit down and talk about tariffs. All right? Let's face it, the whole world is starting to realize that we have an administration that's serious about making things even. As I pointed out earlier, when when Obama gave General Motors $50 billion, okay? They gave him $50 billion. And what did General Motors do the next year? They built a Cadillac plant in China. Okay, this was supposed to save American workers. General Motors lost over 100,000 workers from just that type of thing. So we really do have to get our heads around the reality of what's happened, not just what the news media is trying to get across that day. Wall Street's worst fears over Trump's trade war just faded. Excuse me. The Dow Jones, as you see there, was 42,792, and that was on the 19th. Well, I realized it dropped into the 30,000s right after Trump initiated his tariffs, but it's back up again. All right, my stocks and everything went down just like everybody else's, but they're back up. All right, this is something that we have to understand. As they're saying, excuse me, it was deal between U.S. and China was better than expected. Markets are all about expectations, Lerner said, and relative to expectation, short-term news is better, and it's a time when the market, I would say more broadly, the street, is not positioned for this kind of outcome. Rather interesting that all of a sudden they're doing a about-face, a 180, whenever all they were doing was pointing a finger and saying how terrible Trump was. It's nice to have a business person who is actually understanding business in the White House. Because let's face it, the last people, as we discussed earlier, didn't have a clue on a lot of these things. The Trump administration have arrested 113,000 immigrants and deported over 100,000 since taking office. Let me remind you that Obama deported 3 million whenever he was in office. So let's put this all in perspective. You didn't hear the media screaming back then. You didn't hear anybody going to some other country and talking to criminals about, how they should be back in the United States. All of a sudden, it doesn't fit what they're trying to push. Illegal border crossings, as you see there by this slide. The end of last year was terrible. All right, 54,000, 56,000, 46,000. And that's coming over in a month. That is now 7,000. I explained earlier that if you only put it at 7.5 million immigrants that came in under the Biden administration, that is more than the population, individual population of 36 states. So if you distribute that throughout the rest of the country, that can sway elections. That was the purpose of this illegal fiasco that we had. They brought them in, but with them came criminals. We have 30,000 Chinese of military age that they've allowed it into the country. We have China buying farmlands next to military bases. I wonder why. We have to get a grip on what is in fact happening in this country and stop these things from happening. Trump slams Biden over the astronauts' 286-day space mission. And what it said here, and you see it the second, Musk offered to bring the pair home. Okay? Biden turned that down. So they stayed up there for months just because of a political reason. Had nothing to do with reality. Musk offered Trump. He said yes. A couple days, they were up there and back. The Russian ballerina. She was kept in Russia. She was sentenced for 12 years for donating $51 to a charity in supporting Ukraine. She was freed under Trump. Mark Fogel, the teacher from Pennsylvania, was freed under Trump. But that's not all. Most recent, the Israeli-American hostage returns to Israel after Hamas release. He was there during Biden's time, and he was there, all right? Trump has a unique way of dealing with people, okay? During Afghanistan, Trump told the leader of Hamas that if you, in fact, hurt any of our people, we know where you live. And from what I read the story, the Hamas leader laughed. And Trump walked over with a picture of his house and gave it to him. And he said, we already have it. So, just let us know. During that entire period, before Biden took over, not one American was hurt or injured in Afghanistan. So, like I said, Trump has a unique way of dealing with these things. Now, this is interesting. Trump in Qatar announces the largest ever contract with Boeing. $243.5 billion with one company to, in fact, make planes. Qatar is willing to give the United States $1.2 trillion, which includes economic deals beyond that. Excuse me so much. All right, so whenever you look at this, the news media is talking about the plane that they're trying to give the United States. And it's going to the Air Force, it's not going to Trump, by the way. ABC is in the process of getting sued over that one, too. 400,000 jobs are going to be brought under this contract. 400,000 to the United States. All right? This is phenomenal. Remember that last slide with Pelosi back in 96? 170,000 jobs were brought just because of our trade with the entire country of China. Here is one deal with one corporation, with one country, that's going to give us 400,000 jobs. And it could fan out based on other supporting organizations to over 1 million. And here's one that I think everybody knows of, Gulf of America. Trump renaming that. He's also renaming the Persian Gulf, I think. So, but anyhow, thanks for watching. I want to thank all of those organizations that you saw highlighted. I picked this information. Excuse me, my allergies are killing me. I picked this information because of the fact that I don't put any words into these slides. I take the words right off the slides from these corporations and these news media and everything else. So what you've seen here through this entire process is not Bill's idea. It's ideas from these people who are very much involved with or ingrained in the political process that have given you this stuff. So I'd like to thank you once again for coming. I hope you watch both parts, part 1 and part 2. I think they're very educational to see how elected officials have messed over our country and the remnants of what they leave behind that we still deal with today. So once again, thank you, and we'll see you the next time talking politics in Western Pennsylvania.